Good day, I am Agnes Judy P. Beltran, and it is indeed a great privilege to share to you what I learned about psychological assessment. I know there are a lot of questions in your mind that I hope I could help you answer in this webinar, such as what is psychological assessment? What are its characteristics? How are they classified? What are the different uses? And its purpose. So let us try to answer them. Let us start by defining psychological assessment. This psychological assessment, these are types of tests used to help in identifying strengths and areas for growth that affects one's emotional, personal, and professional development or adjustment. This psychological assessment, the gathering and integrating of psychological data for psychological evaluation. This can be through the use of tests. It can be through an interview, a study, or a behavior can be observed. And then there are also kind of special apparatus and measurement procedures on this purpose. There are several characteristics of psychological tests. One is standardization. When we speak of standardization, it is consistent. The psychological test is consistent and they are uniform in conditions and procedures for the administration of a test. That means whoever would administer that or wherever it will be administered, it's all the same because they are standard. Another characteristic is objectivity. Here, when we say objectivity, the scoring must be free from bias or subjective judgment. So it's uniform. When we score them, it's uniform also. There is a certain score that is specific with the test. It is not like when one is scoring this one, it depends on the person. No, because by that is being subjective. Another characteristic is test norms. When we say test norms, it is here scores are related to others. The information used to rank scores in relation to other scores in the test. So here we interpret the results of a psychological test. There is a somewhat frame of reference or point of comparison to be made. Okay, so this is done in a statistic procedure. Another characteristic is reliability. So when we say reliability, it is consistent in result of the test. So that's why one of the forms is repeating the test. So here, so that we would know that they are standard, they're a good test. So it will be repeated. And then once it will be repeated, it will reveal the same and consistent result, either by same or different evaluator of the test. Another one is validity. When we say validity, it also refers to the consistency of the accuracy, rather, of the measurement of the test, which means that this test, that the te- that mean, which means that the test should measure what is supposed to measure. Like for example, if it is meant to measure mental ability, it should measure mental ability instead of having the test and then it's meant for personality. So So that is validity. Another is, aside from characteristics, there are also several principles of psychological tests. So, in looking at the principles of the psychological test, we have to look into three components. First, it should be standard, no? The standardization, which I have just discussed a little earlier, and then the content, no? The test items that are given, and then also the process. You have to look at the process. If it is valid, it is reliable. Another principle that we have to take into consideration is that the test should have norms. Now, I have mentioned this in a while ago as one of the characteristics of the psychological test. And the score of a known group who have taken the test. Another principle is that it should be given by qualified, should be prepared by qualified experts such as psychometrician, psychologists, and they are pre-tested and selected on the basis of difficulty and relationship to a clearly defined rigid test set of specification. Psychological tests are always standardized so that it can be used by different users. The direction of administering scores are precisely stated so that tests can be done by anyone. Tests usually have what we call These psychological tests have usually have this what we call as a test manual and other accessory materials. These test manuals, these are they are provided as a guide for administration, for scoring, evaluating and technical qualities, and for interpreting the and using the results. So before you give the tests, you have to read the manual. It is there. You can see whether it's reliable, it's valid, how will they be administered, how will they be interpreted, what would be the procedure in scoring. So it is very important that we have to read this what we call as test manual. Now, what are the different purposes of psychological tests? First, it is given to measure and observe a client's behavior so that we can have the diagnosis and we will be guided what would be the treatment. Like, for example, there is something that we have observed in this person. So, most psychologists or psychiatrists, before they give the treatment, they would have to give a test so that they would have a specific formulation for the treatment. Another purpose for giving the psychological test is for research on human behavior. So that we would, by this, when a scientific research will be conducted, we can understand better human behavior. Another purpose is to assess the deviation from normal mental health. Okay, so um, again, when we observe something that there is something different in this kind of person, apart from her normal behavior or normal status, so the psychological tests are being given. Another purpose is identifying one's strength or areas of growth that affect one's emotional, personal, and professional development. Like, for example, in personality test or um, assessing such ability. Okay? Like, for example, you are not so good in math, that's why you have to be developed. No, is we are to be given reinforcement or remedial in math because per assessment you are assessed that you are not so good still in this area. Next, another purpose for psychological tests is assessment for academic achievement. How far have you learned? Or for some children who are um, learning disability, we can also assess their delay in their development. Another purpose is to assess the different mental abilities and attributes. These are usually given for the entrance exam. Now, how are these tests developed? First, in developing the psychological test, the very first thing that should be done is to analyze the situation of what are the skills that will be used. What is it for? What are we going to measure? What do we want to measure? So we have to analyze the situation first so that we would know what kind of psychological test will be developed. After that, we will then have the tentative selection of the test items. There is what we call as test banks. No? Several test questions, several test items shall be gathered, shall be made, and then these are still tentative. Okay, and then after having some tentative selection of test items, a method of administration and scoring, which will be standardized, will be developed for again for consistent and uniform administration of the test. After which, all test items will be administered to our representative groups. And then after that, we go into item analysis so that final selections of the items shall be done. And then evaluation of the final test, whether many got, it might be like it is so easy, too difficult for other tests, so it will be evaluated. So all these tests, all these psychological tests which we have, which were developed by different authors, these have undergone this kind of process before it can be called as a standard psychological test. The psychological tests have several classifications. The first classification is based on construction and administration. So there is an individual test. This individual test, these are designed to be administered to one person at a time, like the Rorschach ink blot test. This is administered only to one person because it is so difficult for this test that it will be administered with several examinees. So, aside from individual tests, there are also some group tests. There are several group tests, and these are designed to be administered to a large number of examinees at a time, such as the OSAT, the Otis Lennon School Ability Test, the AT, and other objective tests. These are administered to a large number at a time. Power tests. Power. If you see the picture, it's like the brain is powered into an electric. So these are designed to measure the level of performance under ample time. So like the some sentence completion tests, they are given a test limit. So this power test, you are tested how far you can go, how far you can go, how what would be the level that you can perform in this test. There are no power tests. These are designed to measure the level of performance under ample time. So to test like the sentence completion test, how far can you go in this? There is also speed test. Okay. These speed tests are designed to measure the number of items that an individual can complete in an in a given time. Okay, like for example, there are 200 items and you are only able to answer 100. No? So that's our speed test. This time, no, for several years already, especially this time of pandemic, there are already a lot of computer-assisted tests. These are designed to administer tests with the use of computer. Other kind of administration is by using the pencil and paper. So this is what we call as the pencil paper test. This requires the respondents to write the answers to the questions by putting a tick mark. Okay, in most university theory exams, these are pencil and paper tests. But aside from the pencil and paper test, there is what we call as the performance test. Performance tests are used when paper pencil test is not adequate to assess complex skills. Okay, so these are usually some of the practical tests used by the universities. Another classification of psychological tests is based on knowledge, skills, and abilities. One is achievement tests. These achievement tests these are typically used in educational and employment settings. And then these attempt to measure the achieved knowledge, such as mathematics or language. Okay, so these are very common in school settings. Like after a semester, the students are given this kind of test so that we would know how far they have achieved with the lessons given by a specific teacher. Or this can be given by psychologists or psychometrician as per request of an instructor. Diagnostic tests, these are different or somewhat similar to the achievement test, but they are here used to measure the knowledge and skills to identify the strength and weakness in the past, present learning. So, like these are just more specific. No, it is not just where or how far they have learned, but they are identifying the specific strength and weaknesses so that this would be the basis for remedial and reinforcement. We have proficiency tests. In most cases, these are English. This kind of tests are designed to measure people's ability in a language, whether they have any training in that language or not. Aptitude tests are also somewhat given during entrance exam tests. These tests measure specific abilities such as mechanical or clerical skills. Like for example, you are applying for secretary. So your clerical skills shall be your ability in these clerical skills shall be assessed. Okay, or it can be perceptual speed and accuracy, attention to details, okay, the capacity to visualize and manipulate objects in space, principles of mechanical operation, ability to operate computers, could also be nonverbal or verbal. Example of this is the General Aptitude Test Battery. Intelligence test. We have heard a lot of this already. I think so. I would like to presume that you have already learned about intelligence tests because it's very common in entrance tests. And these tests attempt to measure intelligence, basic ability to understand the world around. Okay, one example is a standard Binet scale. There are also interest tests. Okay, so our interest can also be assessed. Okay. These interest tests are psychological tests which are meant to assess a person's interest and preference. Commonly, these are used commonly in career counseling. Okay, example is the interest inventory. Neuropsychological tests, these are not normally given in school setting. These are given in special cases. These tests measure deficits in cognitive functioning, such as ability to think, ability to speak, ability to reason out, because these deficits may result from some sort of brain damage, such as stroke or a brain injury. We can have this Vascular Adult Memory Scale. This can be used as neuropsychological test. Occupational test. Okay, a lot of students would ask for this, especially when they are confused what to take up when they go to college. These tests attempt to match interest with the interest of persons in known careers to the interest of persons in the present job. For example, one very popular test is RISE. Okay, so interests are assessed in this, and then they are matched to as to what kind of career they would most likely be successful after college. We have personality tests. There are several personality tests. So these are basically used to assess personality style, such as the 16 PF or the Big Five. Okay, 16 personality factor tests or the Big Five. Placement test. Placement can be either used for career or for educational placement tests. These are planned to provide information which will help to place students at the stage of the teaching program most appropriate to their abilities. Example, entrance exam. No? Like we at the guidance office, we give this admission test and we match their test result to the appropriate program, which most likely they would also be good or excel, or that is matched with their ability also. Lastly, there are specific clinical tests, just like the neuropsychological tests. These are not given normally in under normal conditions. These are not given under normal conditions because these attempt to measure clinical matters, and this can be given only by those clinical psychologists, okay, because they are given to assess, mostly they are given to assess the level of anxiety or somewhat like of depression. So example for this is the rating Hamilton rating scale for depression. So what are the uses of psychological tests? Okay, one use is to get information easily. Okay, because they are objective, they're standardized, so we can get information easily. Unlike in some essay, information is scientifically tested and reliable. Okay, that's why they are used, because they are already reliable and valid. They are used to assist in the diagnosis, as I mentioned earlier. They are used as in formulation for psychopathology of disease, like for the treatment. Now, what would be the specific formula for treatment? And they are also used to assess severity of the disorder. Okay? How severe is the depression? How severe is the anxiety? They are also used in assessing general characteristics of individual, such as the personality test. These tests are also used in forensic evaluation, like in family court issue or criminal charges. They are also used to assess level of functioning or disability. This helps direct treatment again and assess treatment outcome. No matter how standardized they are, no matter how reliable they are, no matter how valid they are, there are also limitations of psychological tests. Because many applicants experience anxiety, we have to take note that human mind is beyond any assessment and limit. So it is not final. The test psychological test results, we would not say that it's final. It's definite. It's absolute. Absolute. No, it doesn't mean that it is absolute. At times, one can behave completely different from original state. So we cannot say that it is really that's it. It's final. It's fixed. No. Okay. Also, one of the limitations of the psychological test is the negative attitude of applicant. So whenever they have this negative attitude, it can alter the validity of the test. Some tests can only be administered and interpreted by qualified psychologists. So it cannot be given by anybody. And lastly, one of the limitations of the psychological test, no psychological test is ever completely valid or reliable. Completely. Though they are valid and reliable, but they are not absolutely valid or reliable because the human psyche is just complicated to know anything about it with full confidence. That is why there can be uncertainty about a case even after extensive testing. That's all. Thank you so much for listening.